well, we're getting ready to put the heads on in just a few minutes. We're just taking a little brake cleaner and rinsing the stuff down the top of these cylinders, and then going to wipe it out with a paper towel. And before we put it together, we'll put just a tiny, light coat of like motor oil on the cylinders, just to lubricate things a little bit. We'll clean around the outside here a little bit as well, where we had the, where the head gaskets were leaking. But unlike some of this other stuff, we're not going to, clean it up to where it's shiny and all that. We just need to get this surface kind of clean, because this is the actual sealing surface right here, not this. All right, so we've cleaned up around the outer cylinder bores on both banks, and we're going to wipe that down with a little carburetor cleaner and get it all nice and clean. Use the air gun to dry it off with. Then, as I said earlier, we'll put a little tiny light coat of motor oil on the cylinder before we put the heads on. But I'd say within the next 15-20 minutes, we'll be putting the heads back on it. All right, well, we should have everything ready to go together in terms of the heads. We've cleaned everything up real well. I put a little light coat of motor oil on the cylinders just so that they have a little lubrication in them when we start it. The head gaskets are in the head. They're ready to go, okay? And main thing is to make sure they stay in the bores as you put the head on. You got to line up all these studs, which is always fun. And there you go, first head's on.
Okay, we have the old mount off of an old beat up oil pickup, and Greg has sandpapered very nicely the end so it holds. That's a new oil pickup. What are we going to do next?
Well, I think this thing was painted, so I'm sanding the paint off of it. It's got to tap up into this hole, okay? But it's really, really tight right now, so we're going to take a little bit more off of it so that it'll tap up in there. It's supposed to be nice and snug, but as you can see by the other one, of course I beat it up taking it off, but the reason why I didn't worry about it is somebody had already beat on it with a hammer before I got to it, and it was already ruined, so it was stuck in there getting it off. I just beat the hell out of it. But putting the new one back in there, we want to make sure it's nice, straight, even, goes in the hole perfectly, it's on the mount perfectly, and we're going to do all that. Well, they have a tool for doing this, which I don't have. And lest you think that I'm crimping this thing down, I have this vice grip on there very, very lightly right under that little ridge right there. And we're going to try to tap it in. It doesn't look like it's going to want to tap in, but we're going to pull with it for a minute. And if that doesn't work, we're going to take it out and bevel a little bit with the grinder and do what we got to do to make it go in there properly. All right, well, we had some of the studs that came out with the head studs on the stud, so to speak, okay? They were kind of rusted up together. So what I've done is I've clamped them in the vise long ways away from the threads, and then use the 13/16 socket to break them loose and take them off. Now what we'll do is we'll clean the threads up and we will thread them back into the block. Now, in this instance, it didn't pull the threads out of the block, but sometimes that does happen. If it pulls the threads out of the block, you have to put an insert or a helicoil in the hole. In this instance, they just came unscrewed, so we're going to clean everything up real good, Loctite them back in place, and we should be in business to put it back together. All right, as we showed everybody before, the head nuts were stuck on the studs. What I've done now is I put the new nuts on there, and I've butted them up against each other, kind of double nutted them, if you will, so it's nice and stiff. We've cleaned the threads up on this end. We've cleaned the thread up here in the block real thoroughly. Now this is some high-tech Loctite. I usually use a little bit of the red stuff, but this is what Ignacio had. This is actually supposed to be better, and it's like high temp stuff with 467, 567. Anyway, put just a little bit of that on there, okay? Doesn't take a lot. And we'll thread this into the block up here. I don't know if you can see this or not. Okay. And let's see, do we have we'll just do this until we bring it down. If you see the threads on the other one, we're going to run it down to the same place that the other one, the next one is. About like that. There you go. All right, and then what we'll do is just pull the nuts off and do the next one. We're in business. All right, we're putting the second head on, and I got the head gaskets in the bores. And like I said before, you got to line all the studs up, and hopefully it'll all be like it's supposed to. And just slide her on like that. Now, before we can torque the head, we got to put the pushrod tubes in it. We got a whole bunch of stuff that we've got to do, but we're closing in on it, and I think we'll probably have the heads and the oil pan and everything on it in the next hour or so. All right, these are the cylinder baffles. These things go under here, like this. And what their job is to direct the cooling air around the cylinder so that they cool evenly. I can't even tell you how many cars that I have come across over the years where these suckers are missing, because what happens is people put the pushrod tubes in, and then realize they've left the baffles out, and they don't want to take it back apart to put them in. But it will run hot if you don't leave these in. They're actually pretty easy to go in place. They go in here like this, and I've heard these things called French locks. I have no idea if that's what the official name of them is, but basically it goes over the studs right here, and then just clips into place. See, there's one there, and then another one down low. If I can get my big old hands in there. There you go, okay? Now, as for the pushrod tube, let's talk about that real quick. Okay, the next thing we've got to do is put the pushrod tubes in, and people make a pretty common mistake there too, okay? I'm gonna get 2 of the O-rings out. All right, you have to have an O-ring on either end of this thing, okay? You don't want to put the O-ring through here and then try to force it through the head, because you're either going to compress it or tear it. So what you want to do is there's two ends to this thing. This end goes closest to the block, and this end goes to the head. So what you want to do is put the O-ring on the end that goes towards the head first, okay? Slide it in here like this, then slide the other O-ring on it, okay? Now, ordinarily we use white lithium grease, or I do, but we don't have any of that, so we've got a little axle grease. We're just going to use a tiny bit of that. All we're trying to do is make sure that that the O-rings will slip just a little bit of lubrication on them. Doesn't take much. Okay, like that. Okay, now I'm going to push these things in like that. Okay, and now watch. I don't know if you could hear that, but they kind of snapped into place. Okay, but what we're going to do now is that we're going to take a socket, which I had laying here. All right. And I hope that's the right one. Put it in there like that. Hit it a lick or two like that, and that seats the O-ring in the head and in the block. When we torque the heads up, it's going to pull them up just a little bit, but it'll all be like it's supposed to be. But we're going to do a few other things before we finish putting all the pushrod tubes in, but definitely do not forget this baffle. That is crucial. And remember, when you put the pushrods in, to be sure that you put it through the block first, or the head first, and put the one closest to the block on after you do that, so you don't tear it or compress it. And after we get it all put back together, I'll show you what it looks like. All right, so we have the heads in place. We have the top row of nuts just on there loosely. I'm going to show you how to put the studs on. And there's a specific sequence that you have to do. You put the head on first, then you push the pushrod tube part way through, put the O-ring on the inboard side, on the outboard side, and then tap it into the block. I think we showed that a few moments ago, okay? So at that point, you have the tubes in the head on there, one row of nuts. Okay, now we're going to put the studs on. And those go in a specific way. These are called guide plates. See the U? That means up, okay? And so what we're going to do is we're going to drop the studs through the guide plates like that. And then on the bottom side of it, we're going to slide these O-rings on like this. Although I'm not very dexterous, okay? And then we're going to put a little bit of grease on them, just a little bit, just so they'll slip a little bit. All the grease is for is just so that the O-rings will slip a little bit in the head, okay? Because we want to make sure they get in the correct position. Okay, now, what we're going to do is we're going to come down here, and Ignacio, if you can show the stud, see how the stud is kind of off center right there, okay? It's not square. What we're going to do is we're going to kind of work that on there until we get it started and we feel it center up and start, okay? By doing that, what that's doing is lining everything up, and then that O-ring that's on the back side of it is exactly in the right place to go in the little recess in the head. And so now all we've got to do is run these things down, repeat the process up here one more time, and then we torque the heads in a specific sequence and a specific torque value, and then the heads are on it and ready to go. It's just a matter of us, finishing the assembly then. All right, we're torquing the heads now. The studs are a 13/16 socket, and the upper nuts are 9/16, I believe. Yep, 9/16. Okay, you torque these in a specific pattern, and what I do is I bring them up, start them at 20, run through the pattern, bring them up to 25, and then finally on 30. 30 is what they should be set on, okay? This is the first one that you torque, and I've already done this one to 20. And you hear the torque wrench click. That tells you it's to the torque value, okay?
And that's the middle one first.
That's the middle one, okay? Then we're going to do 2 more, and I'm looking at the pattern over here on my phone, the GM pattern, okay? Next we do this one. Here, click.
And you're at 20 right now?
20 right now, yeah.
All right.
And then we do this one. And like I said, we won't go through the whole pattern in the video, but we'll start at 20, go through the whole pattern, go to 25, go through the whole pattern, and then finish at 30, and we'll move to the other head. All right, the heads are on it and they're fully torqued. We still got quite a bit of assembly yet to do, but the hard part is done. And what we started to do, or the original problem was the leaky head gaskets and all that. So we have now corrected the problem, but we've got a lot more assembly to do. And when we get done with this thing, it's really going to look better than new with all the powder coated stuff.
Okay, so just to reiterate, the torque values were you start off with 20, then you go from the center out, and then you continue with 25, and you finish with 30 pounds of torque, and then it's all on.
Yeah, and then I run over them several times just to make sure. If you let them sit for a few minutes, sometimes when you run over them, you'll find one's a little bit looser than the rest of them or whatever, as the head kind of, I guess it kind of shifts and takes the shape or whatever. But anyway, it's not hard to do.
Okay, and then we're going to dry. You said we're going to dry adjust the valves, and
What we're going to do is we're going to adjust the valves with the engine out of the car. I'm going to put the whole thing together, and then what we're going to do is we're going to bring it up to top dead cylinder number 1, and we're going to adjust certain valves. Then we're going to bring it up to top dead cylinder number 2 and adjust the other ones. And when we get to that point, I'll show you how it works and how to, how you can get the feel for it and all that stuff. There's some people that claim adjusting the valves like this is not the best way. You have to adjust them hot. But I find if you have a very good good feel for it and kind of a precision touch, if you will, you can usually get them just doggone near perfect, and you don't have to go back into it and fool with it hot. These things are a real pain in the butt to adjust the valves on hot. I don't care what kind of half valve cover or cut valve cover, whatever you do, it's just a mess.
And we kept the valves in the correct order, or the rockers.
The rocker arms, and the important thing with the rocker arms is not the order of them, but you want to keep them in match set. The balls take a set to the rocker arms themselves. And so, if you mix them up, they probably work just fine, but there's more metal transfer as they take a new set.
And so we put them on this coat hanger to keep them in order.
Correct.
But they only need to be paired.
Right, as long as the rocker arm and the balls are a match set, that's typically all you need to worry about.
Okay. So we'll be doing the valve adjustment next time?
We'll be doing the valve adjustment next time. We'll put the rocker arms and everything on it, and from this point forward, the assembly should go really fast.
All right, and we have the shrouds back from the powder coater, but we still have to clean this up some more. This is all cleaned out some, but we still need to clean it some more and grind it off and tidy it up, and then we're going to spray. We're going to paint this original black color that it was, and then we'll be putting in the motor after that. All right.
Won't be long.
All right.
All right, these are the push rods that actuate the rocker arms that open and shut the valves. Okay, and these are, they're not unidirectional. They can only go one direction. If you can see the little hole on the end right there, okay, that's only on one end of the push rod, and that lubricates the rocker arm. So you got to make sure that you put it in with a little hole end out, or your rocker arms won't lubricate. Basically, you slide it in over here, okay, and as you put it in, you'll feel it kind of wants to go in. You wiggle it around, you can usually feel it seat a little bit back there, okay? So we'll put them all in, then we'll put the rocker arms on, and I will adjust the rocker arms on the engine before we start it. Some people say that you can only adjust the rocker arms hot. I disagree wholeheartedly. As long as everything is in good shape, the lifters aren't collapsed, there's no reason you can't adjust the lifters and everything right here on the bench and have them perfect when you start the engine, and that's what we're going to do. Doing is, let me move your hand just a second. You notice this is dimpled up towards the block, what would be the block side. What we're going to do is dimple those back down a little bit. We've already done several of them, make them nice and flat so it pulls the maximum amount of, I guess, torque or whatever you would say on the oil pan. So hit it whack. You see, nice and flat. And now we'll just do all the rest of it. That's good. All right, this all looks pretty clean, but all right, this all looks pretty clean, as does the oil pan down here. But if you wipe it off with a rag and a little carburetor cleaner, you can see how dirty that is. You want to clean that off until when you wipe it, you really don't get any residue on the rag. And then what we're going to do is we're going to glue the oil pan gasket to the oil pan with a tiny bit of sealer. And again, people say don't use sealer, but it's because people go crazy and that stuff squeezes out everywhere, and we just put a tiny little bead, basically just to seal and hold the gasket in place, and we'll have the oil pan on it in probably 5 or 10 minutes. I'm a giant. Actually, I'm just standing on the step stool. There's a couple of little hidden machine screws on the side of these air exhaust ducts that you've got to get way down in there. They're kind of difficult. A lot of times people leave them out. That's not exactly this factory screw, but it's the same size, so that's all that matters. And all we're doing is just putting the sheet metal on real loosely. The next thing I'll do after I hang some of the sheet metal on is we'll put the rocker arms and adjust the valves, and then just, go on from there. All right, we're going to run the rocker arms down. We're not adjusting them right now. We're just kind of putting them in place. You put the push rod in, and if you wiggle it around in there, you can usually feel when it fits in the socket of the lifter. And then I just push on it like this. Wish I had 3 hands. Push on it like that, and then just bring this thing down. And
you have to put a pretty good amount of torque on it.
yeah, and like I said, we're going to go back and readjust them all. So right now I'm just trying to hold everything into place, but I just kind of tightened them before it felt like it bottomed. And actually looking at the number of threads that are showing and all that on there, my guess is it's not a million miles off on the adjustment, but we'll find that out in the next phase. All right, we're going to adjust the valves, and we're going to adjust it with the engine sitting here on the workbench. There are more questions and more misconceptions about adjusting the valves on a Corvair than probably any other thing, okay? There is a school of thought out there that says you cannot adjust the valves on the bench. I agree with that wholeheartedly. Unless there's something worn out, or there's a problem, or a collapsed lifter, or some other valve train geometry problem, there's no reason why you can't adjust the valves right here on the workbench. At the factory, they did not run the engines to adjust the valves. They adjust the valves cold when they assemble the engines. Now, if you have an engine that has plugged up bleed holes in the lifters, or things are worn out, or rocker arms, or not of the proper geometry, yeah, it's not going to work, okay? But the way you do it is this. I have already brought this up to top dead cylinder number 1. Okay, this is number 1 cylinder. It's a top dead center compression stroke. I just went over this one and showed Ignacio how to do it, okay? So basically what we're going to do here is you're going to put your finger in there and twirl that push rod. And you got to have kind of get your fingers up in there, but you can feel it, okay? All right, and I'm going to bring it down just a little bit, little bit, little bit, little bit, little bit. And there, you can feel it, you can feel it. Just put a little bit of pressure on it. So that's basically 0 lash. See what I'm saying? Okay, you can twist it, but it doesn't just move around like it did before.
So it turns, but it doesn't go back and forth.
It can turn a little bit, okay? And I'll bring it up just a fraction more. Just about to right there. Feel the difference? It's just got a little bit of resistance on it. You can turn it.
Okay, yeah, but it doesn't go back and forth at all.
Right, and then I bring them up a quarter of a turn. Just like that. And those should be completely adjusted and ready to go. The procedure is when you're top dead cylinder number 1, you do 1 intake and exhaust, and then you do, and I forgot the pattern, I'll look it up in a minute, but then you do intakes and exhaust on the various different ones. Then you bring number 2 up to top dead cylinder, and then you do the rest of the pattern. And do everything right, it should be perfect.
So it goes number 1, number 2.
Well, no, it goes number 1. There's a whole pattern in the service manual. It's in the 65 service manual telling you how to do this, okay? When you're a top dead cylinder number 1, you do 1 intake and exhaust. And then it's going to tell you, and I don't remember which one it is next, like the 3 intake and 5 exhaust, okay? And then vice versa, vice versa. And then you're going to bring up the top dead cylinder number 2. Then you're going to do both of the rocker arms on number 2, and then you'll do the rest of the pattern. But it's all in the 65 service manual. It tells you exactly how to do it.
And TDC on a Corvair, how do you do it?
Okay, pretty simple, okay? Let's see, hopefully I got the wrench still over here. We have the valves out of this thing. I mean, the plugs out of it, valves. Okay, this is a 3/4 inch socket, okay? And I'm gonna put my finger right here over the cylinder hole right here, okay? And I'm gonna move it around, okay? And you're gonna hear it. I have to come way around with it. Hear it? All right, and there it is. And I'm going to line it up the 0 mark, and there it is.
What are you feeling for?
You feel a little pressure. It'll kind of feel a little pressure come up as it comes up.
Okay.
Because the valves are closing and it's starting to build cylinder pressure. Because this would be the position it would be in when the plug was ready to fire. And so both valves are closed, and the piston's at top dead center in the cylinder.
And how do you know how much pressure is the end?
You talking about on this?
Like when
Well,
you stop.
you can feel it, and then you line up the mark up here. There's a timing mark and a mark on the case. I don't know if you can see it, but right here, this little mark right here, and this one. So when you start to feel the pressure, you just bring it back up. Bring it back and forth until you line up top dead cylinder. Top dead center. It's really not hard. People make it seem a lot harder than it really is.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Well, we've got the valves all adjusted, and that's all done. We're getting ready to put the valve covers on. I must have been a finger painter when I was a kid because I like getting my fingers in the stuff. But I just put a little thin bead of the stuff in there, just like that, not much. And then what I do is, one of the complaints about this stuff is it can get in the oil. So what I do is I take my finger and I do this to make sure that there's no threads of that stuff hanging out, okay? Just like that. And now I got goop everywhere. And let's see, valve cover gaskets.
We got our exhaust hanger on. We've got our fan back in and our fan pulley. This is getting to look like a fairly complete engine.
Yeah, we'll be there pretty soon. All right, well, now the valve cover's ready to go on. I'll do the other one. We'll bolt those suckers on, and then we'll move on to the next thing.
It's time to lay the motor down.
Yeah, we're gonna lay it down because we're basically done with everything we need to do underneath here. And then we'll start putting the rest of the sheet metal on it, spark plugs in it. It'll be about 80% complete when we put it in the car, before we start it. I'll time the distributor. We'll do all that stuff before we put it in.
Excellent.
Alrighty, well, we've got this thing, looking pretty good. We just trial fitted the two side shrouds and the top shroud, just to kind of see how it would look. We've still got to attach the rubber seals to both sides of these shrouds along the edge and the one in the back. Once we get those, stapled or riveted on or whatever we decide to do, then we can screw all the sheet metal down really tight and put the Transaxle on it. We'll be ready to put it back in. I think probably we got another 3 hours worth of work and we'll have it hanging in the car.
So we took the harmonic balancer off using a harmonic balancer puller tool that we got from the auto parts store. We took the, this is a new seal. The old seal we had to pry off with a pretty heavy duty pry bar. It was pretty tough to do. So we'll put some sealer on it on the outside, the metal part, and then we'll put some grease on the inner part. And then we'll have a new harmonic balancer put on. This one's going to have the air conditioning pulley on. And so we're progressing with this rebuild. Okay, we're putting the shroud seals on. I've clamped it down, and we're going to use the tiny drill bit and the staples method to put these on. As you can see underneath here, it's all lined up. I think it's ready to go, so we're gonna go ahead and try and staple the seals back in.
Well, we're putting on the perimeter seal strips. You have the bottom piece of sheet metal, and then you have this little strip, channel strip that goes over it, and the rubber sandwich is in between it. And at the factory, what they did was they just ran it through this heavy staple machine. They just went chunk, 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 chunk right down the line. But what we're trying to do, let's flip it over. We're trying to put it back together and make it look as stock as possible. So we're putting these stainless steel staples actually through the existing holes that were already there, and then we're turning it over on the back, and we're using the center punch and the hammer, and we're painting them over. It's kind of a pain in the butt, but it works.
So these are the Clark's stainless steel ones that are very stiff. The good news is they're probably not going to rust on you. The bad news is they're pretty tough to bend over any other way.
Well, some of the, you can use I think it's a T50 staple, Aero staple. It's the same spacing. I think it's 1/2 inch maybe. I'm not positive. But I know that you can find a staple that fits the existing holes. And that, to my mind, that's actually an easier way to do it because they're kind of made out of mild steel and they're a lot easier to bend over and peen than these stainless steel things are. And from the other side, you can't tell the difference.
So we have this resting on an anvil.
Yeah, we just got a rag behind it to keep it from scratching since it's all been powder coated real pretty. All right, well, this is the torque converter seal. It doesn't actually look like it's been that long since it's been changed, but I believe it was leaking anyway. Okay, now we're gonna pop this thing out of there. There's different ways to do this. Usually, if they're not stuck in too bad, you can just do something like this and pull on it and they'll pop out. And then sometimes, they don't wanna cooperate. Work it down. And this one looks like it's gonna be real stuck. See, that's one of those things that you want it to look real good on camera, and this one's just not gonna do. Yeah, okay. We're gonna have to. There it goes. Finally. I was beginning to wonder. Then we're gonna wipe out the groove real good, and we'll put the new seal in. We're just tapping the seal in. If we had a big socket put on there, we would, but I don't think we do, so we're just going to tap it down a little bit all the way around. All right, we're going to slide the torque converter on the Transaxle, and I can see there was a bunch of fluid right there kind of on the verge of leaking out, so I'm going to temp it over a little bit and see if we get any out of it. I bet we get a little bit, but it won't be much. Main thing is I don't want to slide it on the Transaxle snout and the fluid to come pouring out all over the place. I think we're in good shape. See, all right. All right. And there it is. Which is pretty amazing. There were 3 splines and a seal, and usually you battle putting them in, but that one went right on in. Okay, well, we've already over on this other side here, that's the vacuum modulator. I already had that off, and there's a little gasket underneath there, which is this little guy right here. I replaced the little gasket, okay? And there's a tool for tightening these things, but usually, unless they're just really stuck, you can untighten and tighten them by hand. Over here, this is the governor. There's an O-ring underneath the governor. Let's see, I think I already threw the other one away. Kind of a big one, but anyway, you take out this bolt right here, and then it slides out. And you just wipe it all down and put an O-ring on it and slide it back in. I have this thing tied up. This is the TV lever for the transmission. These things tend to be accident prone. They get drug around a lot and they get broken and things like that, and then that's a major problem when that happens. So we'll just put a wire tie around it to hold it up out of the way while we're fooling with it. I'm going to place the 2 side seals on the differential here. You told me that not long ago it had the big O-rings replaced, so we're not going to take the differential that far apart. And as soon as we do that, I think we're ready to stick it on the engine. We'll bolt the engine and Transaxle together, have it all sitting here on the workbench, and then we'll do the last of the finish assembly. I think we're getting fairly close here.
Okay, and I'll just add that there is a small O-ring inside of this that you have to come through this pan to do, which has been replaced with a Viton one because we were concerned about it leaking. It turns out it was leaking somewhere else than that little spot.
Yeah, and if I was going to fix that in the transmission pan gasket, I'd do it in the car anyway. I wouldn't do it on the workbench just because it's on the bottom part here, the stuff that you got to mess with. So it's actually easier with it hanging in the car over your head, unless you want to flip it upside down and you make a big mess.
2 surfaces of the bell housing, the differential.
Yeah, it takes a lot of wiggling around. Basically what we're going to do is we're just going to get the snout of the torque converter up in the crankshaft, and then we got 2 bolts right here. We'll start those 2, and then we'll use that to pull the Transaxle to the bell housing. And then after we do that, through this hole here, we'll put the bolts in the torque converter.
You're tightening the 9/16 bolt.
It's a 3/8 bolt with a 9/16 head. But yeah, I got the wrench turned backwards. It's kind of tight quarters in here. If you want to, you can only turn it a small distance. See, like that. I could take that vent off, but that almost takes more time than this does. Anyway.
Okay, these are the 3 torque converter bolts that are going to go right in that funny little door there. You turn it and turn the inside thing until they match, and then you put it on. They have that funny top to them, and there's 3 of them. You tighten on the torque converter bolt. Yeah,
we're going to run them down just enough to make a good connection, then we'll flip it around and put the other 2 in.
And you flip it around by a 3/4 inch, 3/4 wrench on the harmonic balancer bolt, and that will give you something to turn the motor with.
All right, well, we've got the Transaxle and the engine bolted up together. We've got the starter back in it. I got to put a couple more bolts in. There's 1 here, and then 2 that go on the bottom, but I usually put those on the bottom 2 in when I get it in the car. But we're getting pretty close to being able to hang this thing in the car, I think.
So what's...
All right, well, we've got the engine and transaxle bolted together. We've got the 3 torque converted bolts in here nice and tight. I've got this bolt in and the 2 on the side in, as well as the 2 starter bolts. And then early you can put the starter in before you put the entire assembly in the car. There are 2 more bolts that go on the bottom. Usually put those on when I get the assembly in the car because they're a lot easier to get to. And we got more than enough bolts to hold it all together, but it's pretty sturdy at this point. It's all in one piece and we're pretty close to hanging it in the car, I think.
What size bolts are we talking about?
These are 3/8. They're 3/8/16 is the thread size. And just make sure you have the right length too. If you notice, see the lengths here are different. The starter ones, you want nice long bolts to get full engagement. The same thing with these. See how it's flush with the back of the hole? See? So you got full engagement of all the threads. We didn't have the distributor out of this thing, but I looked at the wires and there's something crazy about the firing order here, so I'm wondering if they got mixed up while we were fooling with this thing. But regardless, timing the engine, the ignition timing, especially from something that's had the distributor out or it's been all apart, always confuses everybody, and it really is pretty simple. If you put it all back together the right way, you put it together right, when you go to start it, there shouldn't be any drama. You should hit the switch, you should fire right up. 9 times out of 10 when I do that, it works out that way unless I'm having a bad day. But basically, you got to find top dead center. That's the first thing you do. So I got a 3/4 inch socket on here. I got the number 1 plug out. I'm going to stick my finger in there. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to move the engine around. I'm going to try to anyway. Actually, I may need your help, Ignacio. And that feels like that's it there. Where's the mark? What I do is I usually bring it around a couple times to make sure I got it right. That should be it right there. Yep. So we'll back it up. Get it lines up with number 1 exactly, 0, and there we go. And that's number 1 right there. And then you go 1, 4, 5, 2, 3, 6.
Tell me that again, please.
Okay. We have it at the top dead center, number 1 cylinder, okay? The rotor's pointing to where the number 1 would be if it was firing. So that's our number 1 plug position. Even though the engine turns counterclockwise, the distributor turns clockwise. So you do 1, 4, 5, 2, 3, 6. That's the firing order. See right here, 1, 4, 5, 2, 3, 6. That's number 1.
I always thought that was like some sort of club, you know, the 1, 4, 5, 2, 3, 6 club.
It is a club. If you do it right, your engine will start the first time. Anyway, so that's all we've got to do now is put the cap back on, figure out, put number 1 wire on there, run the firing order around, and it should start. All right, so what we've done is we have the number 1 plug out. We're trying to make sure that we have the distributor time correctly. Now, we didn't have the distributor out of the car or out of the engine, so ostensibly it's in the right place. So if we put the plug wires back on the right way, the timing shouldn't have moved, and so when we go to start it, the timing should be exactly the way that it was, unless we move the distributor. But what we've done is we've rolled it over with the bolt on the harmonic balancer.
And there's that little
timing mark, yeah, to 0.
Notch.
Yeah, but what we did was I put my finger over this while you rolled it over, and then when we felt the pressure come up on the cylinder, we know that that's top dead center, okay? And then we just line this mark up with 0, and that's number 1. So now that's our number 1 position, then we just run the firing order from there.
And what's the firing order?
1, 4, 5, 2, 3, 6.
Like that?
Like that.
Okay. And then it also conveniently has them labeled on the shrouds.
Yep.
Or it's got the numbers. So
it's not that difficult.
That's it.
It's pretty simple.
All right. So we're greasing
the fan bearing. This is a little tool you can buy from Clark's Corvair, and we're just putting a little grease in the bearing. It was the bearing wasn't noisy, but it was real loose, which indicates there's not much grease in it. So we'll give it a few pumps of grease, and then should be good to go for a long time. So, just like that. Well, it looks like we're closing in on putting this thing in the car. Ignacio finally got these little rubber deals on these shrouds, and it was quite a pain, as it always is. I think he gave up on the crazy staples that Clark's supplies with this stuff and used some stainless steel wire, which seems to be a lot easier to work with. We've got to just put some sheet metal on it, put a few bolts in, and I think we're ready to set it on the engine dolly and hang it in the car, hopefully in the next hour. Okay, so what we're going to do, all those wimps, we're going to pick this thing up and hopefully balance it on that dolly while I put this bolt in there to hold it. and then we'll wheel it around and put it in the car, but we gotta lift this thing off the table and down there and balance it and not drop it and get the bolt in and all that cool stuff, and you know, it's a pain in the butt. I don't think I can do this without help.
Okay.
That's the thing, is I can't do it. Hold on, let's see what we got here.
I barely.
Yeah, see, I can't do it without help. It's gonna take 2 or 3 people on this.
3, go. All right.
You know what?
Down. 3 people put it down with some wooden blocks, and we were able to do it. 3, 2, 1.
All right, we're just making sure we got the right nuts here. We're fixing to hang this thing on the mounts. This is always the fun part, to get everything lined up properly. But basically, this jack is, or this dolly is designed so it picks up on the back end first, and so we hang these on the 2 studs, get the nuts started, and then we raise up on the other end and come that way. And it's a little bit involved, but it's not terrible. We'll get it in here just a minute.
Okay, and this is it in the engine bay. It's about to arise. Unlike other cars, the Corvair engine comes in from the bottom and is taken out from the bottom and not through the top. So that's a view of the front 2 mounts. They're 2 bolts. Greg's hand in orange is on one side, and then the other side you can see is free. And then there's another mount that goes about right here that we have taken off here. Let me get that in a picture. That's the other mount that hangs down just like this.
Yeah, these are two transmission mounts, and the stud is vulcanized in the rubber, and the stud sticks out the bottom, and that kind of isolates the vibration of the thing, and so that's kind of the principle behind it.
And so if you're wondering how, you know, where the mounts are and what they are, that's the ones.
Basically, the engine hangs on 3 studs in an early model.
It's like 2 horns in the front and this one hanger in the back that mounts it like that, and that's really all that holds it in.
And contrary to what you've heard on old wives' tales and videos, the engines do not fall out of them.